Hey founders, Ed Kang here, lead advisor for startups.com. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to decide your MVP, how to decide the approach, which MVP to build, all those good stuff, which is a pretty critical decision that you're going to be making on your founder journey. We're going to talk about the definition of an MVP, which stands for minimum viable product, the best approach, how it depends on your capacity and runway, the questions you should be asking and thinking to yourself, MVP options. We're going to cover no code, low code, technical DIY, and an outsourced MVP. I'm going to walk you through the advantages and disadvantages that I see. Little disclaimer here, these are my opinions only based upon the multiple startups that I've done, talking to all founders across the startups.com network, but there are always variations. But this is sort of the prevalent, I guess, methodology that founders use. And I like to see, as a founder myself and as someone who advises founders, also as a general partner for an investment fund and an angel investor myself, throughout the history, I've just seen things work this way. Now, the startup industry has changed quite a bit. So you're going to see different levels of application and contextual relevance that might have changed. For example, the startups world has drastically changed since when I got started back in, gosh, I'm old. I started working in startups in early 2000. I started dabbling in 1999 and then really went through the first .com bubble in 2000 that started to bust in the year 2000 and so forth. And then here I am today, and wow, it has changed over decades. But let's just jump into it. I digress. We're going to talk about what is an MVP. So an MVP, as I said, stands for minimum viable product. And the question you're asking yourself is, what is the minimum product needed to validate or invalidate my assumptions about the validity of my startup solution? Okay, validity or viability. Let me just change that word there. I'm going to say viability. That was like a word salad question there in terms of repeating the same word over and over again. The viability of my startup solution, right? So every founder starts with assumptions on whether or not their startup is actually solving a problem or people will want the product that they're building, etc. And this is the best part about being a founder, and the worst part is that those assumptions are yours. Founders often ask me, well, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't know. I can't relate, or I don't have that problem. Or, there might be a better way to solve the problem. So I might have some experience saying, well, that normally doesn't solve the problem, but if you've got a better way. And that's what founders do in startups. They're using innovative technology to solve problems, typically in underserved areas or gaps in the marketplace that have a certain type of friction, or there's an incumbent that's entrenched and it's never been done that way before. And so the best and brightest startups are creating a completely new category, a way to do business. Think about Airbnb, or Airbnb renting out your couch to an axe murderer. Just kidding. That's what we thought it was in the beginning, but turned out to be a category defining startup. eBay, auctions, video games, different types of video games are creating new types of categories, Snapchat, new type of disappearing text message, all that stuff. That's what you're looking for. So I don't know. We don't know. The question is, what's the minimum amount of work that you can put into it to validate or invalidate the assumptions that you have on whether your startup is viable or not? Now, what's important to understand is this is not a light version of your final product. This is not a version where you kind of strip down and you build something, but you only let founders use it one time, or let's say founders have a maximum usage or 7-day limited trial, or if it's like a social network, they can only add like 10 friends or something like that. That's not the purpose of this, because then it's not an MVP, because you can end up spending a lot of money. And this is what we want to avoid with MVPs. You want to avoid spending a lot of money, like the founders that I know of that have spent $150,000 building a solution nobody really wanted, and they're out $150,000. So it's not a light version of the product, like less features. What it is, it's an actual minimum viable product. It might look completely different, but you're putting it out there to just test out whether your assumptions are valid or not. And we're going to talk about how you approach that in a subsequent lesson. I'll talk about the different types of MVPs specifically that you could be building, but there are kind of like these broad categories. But just remember, that's the question. I literally push myself to say, what is the crappiest version of the product that I can put out that doesn't even do what might be the final version, doesn't have to, but proves that people would want it, it solves a problem, etc. Like I said, it may look completely different. We'll talk about those. Give you an example of an MVP. This is an MVP, one of the MVPs that I've done. This is for a video game that I've been working on. But what I did first was the mechanics of the video game I put on cards and I play with my kids. And this is going to be a big video game. Like we're talking blockchain, metaverse, all that stuff. But this don't look like a video game. Well, this is the minimum viable product. This is the crappiest product that I could come up with to actually see if I'm even pointing in the right direction, barking up the right tree. I've done MVPs that are manually done, like SaaS platforms where I promise a company that I'm going to measure the intrinsic motivations of their employees, et cetera. And so it's been a clipboard and then I've had to hand calculate it. It's funny. I'll show up at organizations with an army of people with clipboards and we do it and we write on paper. Looks nothing like the software platform that we're going to create, but then we manually add it up. And then I've spent long hours mapping nodes and, replicating the interface, acting like the software exists using Photoshop and Illustrator and all that stuff. So it's not the light version. In fact, it's a crappy version that's manual, but I sold it. And so it depends on what you're able to do, your capacity runway. Let's talk about that. But just remember, it's not a light version of your product. Just open your mind to the different types of things that you could be doing as far as an MVP to figure out whether you're going in the right direction. So first, what you need to consider, a couple things. So first is your capacity. So your capacity are things like time, stuff like your domain expertise. I always warn founders that want to go and solve problems that they care about, like, social problems, but they have no domain expertise in doing that. And, I often challenge people and I say, who are very opinionated about the way government should work or, social solutions for issues in society. And then I say, well, if you can't solve these problems in your own home and then at your own workplace, in your own community, then what gives you the right to have an opinion of it on a global scale, right? And that may sound really harsh, but there is something about domain expertise. The best founders have the capacity to access domain expertise, or they go and learn what it's like to be in this particular industry and they figure it out. And so domain expertise, there's also things like cost of opportunity. What is that? For example, I am in my mid 40s, going on the back half of my 40s. I've got 2 children. I got a house, got a mortgage, been married, 20 plus years. And I can't just go YOLO my life into a startup anymore. I have to really think through how I'm going to approach my startups, because if I was young and 25, I'd be doing, I guess 25 is young. If I was 25, single, and I lived in my parents' basement, which I did when I was working in startups at one point in time, then I'd be doing completely different startups. I'd be YOLOing my life away saying, I'll pay my folks a few $100s in rent and just live lean and mean and just pump everything I've got in a startup. I don't even need a job, right? Or I could just pick up gigs. I could drive Uber, all that stuff. But now that I'm older, I have this cost of opportunity. So you want to be thinking about how you're approaching the cost of opportunity, which is the cost that you're paying not doing something else. So for example, if I could be working a job that pays me $100,000 a year, well then, and I waste my year doing the wrong things in startups, well, that has cost me $100,000, even though I might not have spent $100,000 in cash. So you want to be thinking about, what is my capacity to be able to do that? Your location, the ecosystem around you, etc. Those are extremely important in terms of your environment. So you want to be thinking about these things. Next is your runway. So your runway is calculated, your burn rate. And then you want to calculate that by how much money you've got in the bank, right? And so let's say you've got $10,000 and your burn rate is $1,000 a month, is what happens that leaves your bank account because of your startup. Well, then you've got 10 months runway. And why is this important? Well, that's because a lot of founders commit to building a startup it costs substantially more than their runway, and they YOLO their life in, and then slowly they don't make money, and then they're out and they have to go get a job, and again, you pay that cost of opportunity. Or they think, oh, I'm going to get an investor. I'm going to quit my job and get an investor to pay for me to figure out. Investors aren't going to pay you to figure out your MVP, just letting you know. Some investors might, and this is what we call the friends, family, associates investors, or the friends, family, associates, and fools, because it's very foolish to invest money to get someone to figure out what their MVP is. And that happens on very rare occasion in VC world. If someone has so much domain expertise, they know whatever you're going to work on. Let's say that you're a founder and you've already taken VC money and you built a company from scratch and you took it public, and you are hailed as the next unicorn king or queen from TechCrunch, right? Well, yeah, a lot of venture capitalist investors will just give you money and say, I don't know what you're going to do, but I trust that you're going to figure out. I want in for a larger stake of the company because that's an earlier stage. It's riskier, but there's more reward if you get in at that moment and say, don't worry about all the other investors. Let me take, 30% of your company right now, and let me fund you to figure out the idea. Okay. And so what happens, like Peter Thiel, he does the Peter Thiel Fellowship. He basically extends the runway of founders. So he pays students $100,000 a year to quit school, and he gives them that runway for the year to figure out what startup to do. That's that type of investor, very few and far between. So you want to calculate your personal runway. So hopefully you have a job and you can come and your runway isn't getting melted down if you have to rent servers or pay freelancers or different things like that. You got the runway to pay for it. You want to be brutal about your runway and your burn rate and managing your burn rate. That's going to determine what type of MVP you want to build. Okay, so that's what you want to think. Okay, next is finally your MVP option. So let's go through this. So after you've figured out your capacity and your runway, what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, what type of MVP do I want to build? And here, the best part is there's so many tools out there to build MVPs, especially if you're not a technical co-founder. All right, let's break this down. So there's a no-code MVP, and that is you don't have to do any coding. You can use the tools that are currently out there and figure it out. I love no-code MVPs. For example, my video game that looks like this is a no-code MVP. No coding whatsoever, put it on a piece of paper, get my kids to play the game, run around and try it. So the advantages are, no technical skills required. Okay, you don't have to be a technical founder. Okay, and here are the disadvantages. I don't think there are any disadvantages in there. Okay, maybe you're impatient, but there are no disadvantages. But if there's one thing I would say is sometimes it doesn't fit. Sometimes there's no fit in the sense that you can't actually build a no code MVP. I'm going to say 99% of startups, you could build a no code MVP. But for example, if you're building something that's got hard science or deep tech, well, then that's not going to work. And we're talking no code MVP. Your MVP could be a PowerPoint presentation. I remember Dropbox, they did a video. They said, here's how it's going to work. And they just created a video, and then, they got all these people to sign up, etc. So you don't need technical skills to build a no code MVP. I see the very little advantages, because at least you can go and start to validate and invalidate the idea with users that gives you this continuous feedback loop. So I always recommend no code. My buddy Pedro of Fractal Software, who actually builds software MVPs for founders, he always says, be the MVP. So go out and try to sell it, be the MVP yourself, do some like non-linear, type thing, and go from there. Or, when I say non-linear, like it doesn't have to be a software, step by step. Just go and sell something, maybe turn into service, or say, would you even buy this, etc. Right? So the next is a low code MVP. And this is where you hack something together and you need a bit of coding skills. So for example, your WordPress site, and you want to embed some tables into it, or you want to program an Excel spreadsheet to pump out a certain type of formula and show up on a mobile device, etc. That's your low code MVP. So the advantages are, it's techie, okay, yet accessible. So you can start to see whether or not it actually will work in a tech environment, right? The disadvantages, there are very few disadvantages, but, need some coding. You need some skills. You need to be able to hack what's going on. And I personally recommend that all founders, you develop some type of low code, hacking skills, whether you're adjusting a CSS cascading style sheet, or you can get into a WordPress template, or you can, go to a PayPal and figure out how to get the snippet of the code and put it in, etc. So you need some skills, but those are easy to learn. And the disadvantages also is sometimes software is not available to do what you might want to do. But there are a lot of low code solutions coming out now. There are platforms that let you build apps with just some adjustments, etc. Right? WordPress, I think, is probably your most famous one. Then there's a technical DIY. That's a do-it-yourself. So this is if you're a technical founder, right? So, the advantage is DIY. You can do it yourself. You're self-reliant, and which is great. So if you have coding skills, go out, start hacking away. The disadvantages is, yourself. So what happens is, if you're a coder, a lot of coders can do their own solutions. So they, I can do this, and they just start hacking away because it's fun, but they don't really know what they're trying to build. So I know lots of coders that went and said, I thought I was building something that everybody wanted, and I spent all this time, and then I launch it, because you can always be tweaking. Like, when do you end? If you can build something yourself, I take it to a more analog thing. It's like, I'm a classically trained artist, a painter, a cartoonist, animator, comic book artist, and designing my own tattoo or my own shirt that I'm going to wear is an infuriating experience. I could just keep going and going and going and start tweaking. I could be doing this and I could be doing that. And so that doesn't work. So you have to kind of create some boundaries and figure out, okay, at what point in time do I stop trying to keep coding this thing? And, at what point in time might I be building something that people don't want? So that's the disadvantage. You're in your own head is what happens. You can't see the forest for the trees. Then there's outsourced, and there are very few advantages to outsourcing. And let me explain the reason for that. Is because most non-technical founders, when they outsource, you are trusting your startup life to a third party that's got its own unit economics, needs to make its own profit. The company could shut down, etc. But the advantages are speed. The advantage is speed. That's it. Like, you pay for speed, right? And also the other advantage is you might be able to access expertise, but that can be an issue because you got all these technical DIY people thinking they know what to do. And this is the advantage or disadvantage, cost, okay? Cost and, what I'm going to call black swan events, or you're just going to be taken advantage of, right? So taken advantage of, swindled. And there are a lot of predatory type companies develop my houses out there and say, oh yeah, we'll build MVP and all this stuff. And they'll start telling you, yeah, you know, and you'll just come up with a feature and you won't know whether that feature is good for your MVP to validate or invalidate validity. And so what you do is you end up just saying, okay, and you start building it. And that's where you get this scope creep and this bloated solution. And next thing you know, you're getting these big bills from the developer, or they're saying, oh, we ran into this snag and we can't do it. And unless you pay us more money, you know, et cetera, we can't figure out the problem. That's the issue with outsourcing. But there is speed and there is expertise if you can find the right development partner. And that's where I say, interview like it's the last hire that you're going to do, and make sure you find the right development partner. And then you also find the development partner that understands MVPs. Like literally, here's the test. Say, what is your methodology and philosophy in building MVPs? And if they repeat everything that I said to you about MVPs and let's look at all that stuff, okay, maybe you're going in the right direction. And then test them with little bite-sized chunks. So what I do is I'll say, what can I get for $1,000? They say, can't get anything for $1,000. Figure it out. What can you program me? Okay, maybe $5,000 if I'm building something robust. But I'm going to say, what can you build me? Because, you know, I can go find a low-code solution out there and hack it together myself. So there's got to be a reason, instead of me, and I'm not going to spend my time, I'm going to have, my time is valuable. I'm going to be working on other things, and I'm going to give you $5,000 to figure out what can you get me to validate or invalidate my assumptions and prove or disprove the viability of my startup. You know, that's how it works. So there's your overview about how to decide on the MVP. I suggest you go over and you just write down, like, you know, everything, all the headers, my runway and capacity, write it all on a sheet, mind map it out, and then you can decide which way to go. In the next videos, I'll talk about some more details in terms of how to approach the MVP in terms of what exactly to build and your different options there. But you got a lot to think about if you're at this stage. Good luck. Keep, you know, plugging away, and let us know if you have any questions. We're available for office hours, all that good stuff. Welcome to becoming a startup founder. I'm glad you're here. I'll talk to you soon.